Hi class, this is the lecture on narration, which is one of the most interesting things I think we study, and it's also one of those devices that you cannot escape most often because there's always a teller of the tale in prose, okay? Guru and Lee emphasize this well in this quote. Maybe this is because the manner of telling the story is as important as the events, because whoever tells the tale shapes how it is told, the events in the proper place, order, and leads us to the planned conclusion the narrator has in mind the whole time where he or she is going to bring us, in the very rare case that the narrator is, unless it's in the very rare case that the narrator is telling the story as it unfolds. Okay. As in before, there's a lot in this handout and some terminology you may have to look up. There is more in this handout than is in the book, so you want to make sure you look at it before you take your quiz. Okay. So there's three narrative positions or literary points of view that you should be highly familiar with and that you must identify in your paper. An analysis that doesn't deal with what literary point of view the text is written from is really missed a major component of that text. Okay, so you have first person narration. Things you're going to consider there is the narrator a central participant or an observer? Is he or she sympathetic? If not, or to whom? Are they outside the tale? Are they inside the tale? And there's also a certain character called the reflection character. Um, this is a character where he or she may show certain, the narrator may show certain sympathies or increased knowledge for a single character. This character can be called the reflection character because the narrator demonstrates his or her sympathies for that character. The way the narrator describes that character is said to reflect the narrator. So we label that a reflection character. Okay, and that character does not know that they're being described that way. Okay, an entire story inside one character's mind is called stream of consciousness or interior monologue. You could also have moments of stream of consciousness in a story. If you like that, you might look at like Portrait of an Artist of a Young Man or some James Joyce piece because we get a lot of that, Virginia Woolf. And these make for really interesting shifts when you're performing, particularly like maybe in To the Lighthouse, you get some interior stream of consciousness, um, because you're going to have to differentiate between those moments that are within inside the mind and those moments that are actually occurring as events unfolding in the text. And you can use your face, eye placement. You do maybe your stream of consciousness when you're looking like this, and then you come back to the center for your narrator. But eye placement becomes a key way, and even the way you position your face tells your audience if you are trying to convey two different voices within that narrator. Um, so you can have a stream of consciousness, an entire text written that way. You can also have segments, okay? And you can look at, if you're into theory, a homodiegetic narrator. It's a special type of first-person narrator that may be useful in your analysis. You have third-person narration. Excuse me. Third person narration comes with some challenges, particularly that it's not embodied. There's not a character for us to associate that narrator with. So, what you as a performer have to do is you have to decide what is the personality of this narrator. In fact, I suggest that you treat your third person narrator as if it were another character. Okay? Look at the word choices. If they're, polysyllabic Latinate words, are they trying to show off their knowledge? Do they focus on minute details and do they notice things that the characters don't notice? Would this tell us that they're an inquisitive or highly observant person? So you kind of want to register what their tone is and their attitude, and then you want to know what some of the things are that they notice. And this will help you to apply a personality to a disembodied narrator, and that will really aid your performance. And it'd be great for your analysis too. Um, you want to, are they objective? This idea that an omniscient narrator is objective is not a good one because an omniscient narrator can be highly subjective. They can talk about other characters, some characters more than others. They can talk more favorably about some characters than others. Generally, omniscient narrators have sympathies and alliances, and they very rarely give equal time and equal sympathy to all the characters. So you want to look at that. Um, I always think about when I'm reading a narrator, this question I asked, have you ever read a book and when you finished, you were thinking in language rhythms similar to the text? And I remember when I first finished David Copperfield, I was a senior in high school. And I remember like for the next 2 weeks, I was thinking in language like David Copperfield, the way that David wrote and talked and some of the ways he was kind of dramatic and melancholic sometimes. And course, that's happened several times since then, but when I finish a longer text, those rhythms get into my thinking for a while. And if you can figure out what those are, there's some of the personality of the narrator. You've picked up on that. So that can be a neat thing to happen. A nonfiction text, the difficulty is the narrator is probably the author. So you want to figure out how faithful are you going to be and how much work are you going to devote toward understanding who the author is. You need to devote some because we don't want you to do a performance that's against the grain of who that author is. But you don't, you're never going to do it perfectly. You don't know him or her and you can't capture. And moreover, we don't even know if the author fully disclosed himself in an honest way. I mean, we do know he didn't. So, but you can still pick up on some traits that may help. Okay. Second person narration and heterodiegetic is a type of third person narrator that's open to multiple influences. And again, it's the same theorist. Second person narration can be really interesting. And there are a lot of second person narration, especially today. Like if you do a blog or an essay, you is being thrown into essays in, ways I haven't seen or that I didn't grow up with certainly. But you can also have literary text, particularly epistolary text. Some of you have had Brit Lit 1 and you read, I forget what you read, but you read one that was an epistolary text. I always think of The Color Purple. The difficulties with a second person text is, the difficulties and the really great challenge is, you have to identify who the you is in the text. And we have a couple of choices. Are they outside the text? Are they involved in the text? Is it somebody that the narrator loves, somebody that they hate, somebody that they saw one time? You've got to try to figure out who that you is. Could be a self-address. You never do it right, and if I'm angry at myself. So a self-address could also be another way of invoking the you, an impersonal no one in particular. So you have to determine who the you is in the text. And then as a performer, you have to be careful that you don't assume that your audience is that you. So you have to use your face. You almost have like this invisible wall between you and the audience. And right in front of that wall is the you you're really addressing. And beyond that, it's the audience that's watching you. So as a performer, it can be a really way to show off and show that you're able to clue your audience in that you is not the you that's watching. Okay, so that can be cool. What are some other narrative considerations? Central intelligence, this is a Henry James term, and it deals with third person narration when there's still kind of this idea of a personalized narrator that has the wealth of knowledge. So you could look that up a little bit if you wanted to use that term. Some of you may recognize it. External is very much related to the outside narrator, but you want to add to this idea, does the narrator comment on the story they are involved in, or do they withhold commentary? Do they aim to simply tell, which is going to build their trustworthiness, and you're going to assume more that they're telling the truth? We can't always tell if that's a correct assumption, but it does lead, the lack of commentary makes it feel like it's more just the facts. An internal narrator, are they dramatized? Again, like Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby, he is a dramatized narrator. He actually speaks and partakes in the story. So he is both the storyteller and a part of the story's drama. And his opinions definitely intrude in the story. And, a careful reader will realize that from the first page, he's laying down his opinions and shaping the way that we're reading the text. And you really have to go back and kind of read the story and go, wait a minute, I was thinking that because Nick said that. And kind of, it's a challenge to view the story on its own. I'm going to, hold on one second. Okay. Had to get my cord, my computer was going low. All right, so now I want to come down here, talk about narrative distance. And narrative distance is somewhat related to this term locus that we studied when we looked at poetry, which is the physical and psychological position of the speaker. Well, a narrator is related to his text. You have to position the narrator in relationship to the text. And you want to figure how geographically, how emotionally, how physically close the narrator is to the text. For example, if a character is telling a story ages and ages hence, then he or she it's a long time in the future and they're recalling something that happened long ago, and distance softens our memories and it can also make them maybe not so accurate. So that's something to look at. How far away, how involved they are. So narrative distance is really about geography, it's about chronology, and it's about emotional connection to the tale. So this again is something you really want to analyze. These are really cool close reading considerations. They're called narrative frames or narrative structures. I wish I'd written narrative architectures. Okay, so you have the open frame, which is a story that begins outside, for example, Scarlet Letter. You have the introduction where the character finds the sparkly letter A in a box, and then we go inside the story and learn all about Dimmesdale and Chillingworth, but we never return to the open frame. A closed frame is like Ethan Frome, where you begin in the outer frame, you introduce we learn about a character who then we get inside the story, and usually they're different. You get inside the story, the whole story of Ethan unfolds, and at the end we go back to the frame. So it begins and ends on the same note. I'm not gonna make it, it's gonna die. I had to shift locations because the cord still isn't working, so sorry about that pause. All right, so we have open frame, we talked about, and then we are on to closed frame. We did that one. The next one is a mirror narration. In this architecture, events in one half of the novel are mirrored by events in the second half. In biblical studies, we call this typology. It is not the same as a motif or theme, but the actual events are mirrored. The Stranger is a good example. In embedded narrative, we read in Britlit 2, if you were with me, The Heart of Darkness is an example. Oh, I'm sorry, Heart of Darkness is not an example. Okay, embedded narrative, the narrative is an outer narrator who introduces and frames a second narrator. So you have somebody who says, here's this person, and then that person goes in and tells the story. Okay, and they keep going inside each other. There's theoretically no limit to the number of frames, but 2 is enough. 1,000 Nights, Arabian Nights, 1,000 Nights has a outer narrator who tells the story of Sherazade, and then she in turn tells the story of various other characters. That's a really elaborate embedded narrative. Okay. Then you have a contiguous narration. Contiguous narration is the events move forward character by character. So we might focus on one character for events A, B, C, then another character for events D, E, F. The narrator floats from character to character. One text that does part of this, but it actually has an overlapping idea, is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. Okay, you focus on each section of the book focuses on a specific character. Some people argue that the Hawthorne text does this as well. That the Scarlet Letter does this. That a series of chapters focus on each character. Okay, and then the next one is a contiguous narration. No, we did contiguous. Continuous moves forward, but in continuous narration, you have one person telling the story and then it flips and another character tells the story, sometimes from a different point of view. So you might have, 3 chapters are told from the perspective of character 1, then the next character tells the story from the character 2, okay, and it moves the story forward that way. Examples of a contiguous narrative, sometimes called a synoptic narrative, are Azalea dying in the mansion, and you see this, one place you might see this a lot is in filmmaking, okay? And then I included here a couple of sources. I know this one's Wikipedia, but it's got a really good biography. It's on good terms, and you can look elsewhere. Sometimes you just need to familiarize yourself with some of the terminology. This is a narratology website by Dino Faluga out of Purdue, and it has excellent terminology, very easy to grasp for if any kind of theory is new, or if you enjoy narratology or structuralism and you want to go a bit deeper. And this one does a really good job with this idea of event and plotting and how the narrator plots. This is a very interesting article. Probably a little more work to get through this one. All right, sorry for the stops and starts today. Had a little electronic or power issue and a dog bark and other things, but I think we got through it. See you soon.